And so Stravinsky harmonizes it for four voices and gives that manuscript back to Mr. Balanchine. And I got a copy of it in the 90s from the Harvard Library, where a lot of Stravinsky and Balanchine's personal effects and manuscripts lived.
Really?
And I started thinking, well, it was so lovely. And the idea that one master had given it to his friend, another master in another discipline, and that Stravinsky had harmonized it and given it back, it just seemed like it was begging to be something larger.
David.
Hello. Well, thank you so much for inviting me on this. I mean, I've been watching the episodes. It's unbelievable the depth and breadth and range of people that you have on your show.
Yeah, thank you. It's wonderful to meet you here on Zoom, and thank you for watching. I mean, I'm trying to prove also all the different forms of art, and also speak to people about the different forms of art, that we don't usually think about. But you've got an amazing story. I've read about your work, and I mean, you're a composer, you're a screenwriter, you're an author, you're a producer, you're a director. I mean, all these creative things that you are doing is amazing. Pardon?
And a dad too.
Oh, wonderful.
That's a full-time job by itself sometimes.
And that's a wonderful thing to be as a dad.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun journey. Lots of ups and downs, probably more downs than ups, but it's what you sign up for when you're in the arts, as you know.
Yeah, no, that's true. But you are a composer that has a great interest in dance. You compose mainly, could I say you compose mainly for dance or ballet?
Yeah. Yes, that's my most, I'm mostly interested in dance because I love the theater, and I love the experience of being in a theater, and always have since I was a little guy. And as a composer, you kind of have three options if you want to work in the theater. You have the movies, you have opera, and you have dance. And opera never really excited me. Just not enough action. Didn't feel as sensual an art form. I'm very interested in the sensuality of dance. And of course, you're being told a story in opera.
Yeah.
And go along for the ride. Whereas with a lot of dance, especially the kind of dance that I'm most interested in, compose mostly for, you can, as an audience member, you can bring your own story to the dance because it's mostly abstract. I'm not talking about Romeo and Juliet or Swan Lake or Nutcracker. I'm talking about your standard mixed rep evening, which is 2 or 3 or 4 pieces, usually between 10 and 30 minutes in length, separated by intermissions, and they don't generally have stories or narratives. And so that was fascinating to me as a storyteller, that you could have one thing in mind as the creator, and an audience member or a concert goer or dance goer could sit there and bring their own experience to it, which makes it multi-layered. That was fascinating. And then movies, that's a whole different talent. You have to be a very fast writer, and I'm very slow. My last piece for New York City Ballet took 28 years from start to finish. So, and I write slowly. I mean, that was the process of getting the commission and getting the whole thing mounted, but also I write slowly and I enjoy the process. I mean, I write, with pencil, like it's still pre-computer era. So the process is the most enjoyable part for me. So I'm a slow writer. So movies were out and opera was out, and so dance it had to be.
But I first want to say about the writing still in pencil, and I spoke to a composer a while ago, and he said when he initially started writing music, he also didn't have the computer, but then the moment you hear the music then for the first time, when the orchestra plays it or when musicians have your music, it's so wonderful. Do you have that same experience?
Yeah, it's both wonderful and scary because you're afraid, that what you wrote isn't going to be playable here or there, or the French horns are going to drown out the winds, and the brass are going to be too loud and overpowering. There's a lot of like mixing and balancing things that can make you pretty anxious before you hear it. But generally, especially now, I'm in my mid-50s. I'm not a kid anymore. I've done this a lot and often enough that I think I know how to orchestrate. So generally the experience is it's pinch me. I mean, it's just when you finally hear it in a good hall with a good orchestra, it's just, there's nothing like it. That's part of the process that we were talking about.
Yeah.
You're often the only person in the hall, so it's not like they're performing for anybody. It's not that kind of excitement, a gala or the adulation of concert goers or dance goers afterwards. It's really just about the process of creating the music in that moment, and it's pinch me.
But now, did you dance yourself?
No.
Really?
I mean, I had one dance lesson when I was working with Twyla Tharp, sort of as a joke for one of my birthdays. But and there's a videotape that exists. It's pretty embarrassing. I'm pretty bad.
Oh, okay.
So no, never danced.
But that
I dance, at weddings.
Oh yeah,
I like to move my body to music. I do it when I'm composing, just spinning around here in my studio.
Really? Yeah. I wanted to ask you now. So when you write the music, do you see the dance or you make the movement to understand?
No. Okay. I mean, the choreographer is tasked with making the steps, but in my head, I'm always picturing movement and I'm feeling the music it has to work for me. It has to work for my body, even though the choreographer is going to come up with something completely different. It's still important to me that I can move to it and it can move my body. It's a somatic thing.
Does it bother you when the choreographer has something else in mind where you had maybe this idea when you were writing?
It can, but, I defer to them because hopefully they defer to me on the music side of things too.
Oh, okay. So there has to be also a bit of a communication between you and the choreographer.
Yeah, and sometimes, you are wonderfully surprised. The choreography often is like way better than anything I could have moved in my brain or here in my studio, moved to.
So is it something like you have to release it in a way, like you have it and you work on it and then it's like, okay, now I sort of give it into somebody else's hands or you have to have the dancers also understand what was the idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination and it's always different. Every choreographer I've worked with, from when I was in college up till today has a different approach. There's a different amount of back and forth that certain choreographers like. They're very hands-off, very hands-on, coming into the studio periodically to hear things or just give it to me at the very end. And the way that gets communicated to the dancers is always different too, depending on who's making the dance. So for each piece I've done, I could tell you a whole different story. It's not like there's a way,
But now you've also worked with Paul Taylor.
Yeah, that was one of my very first experiences. I had gone from working with student choreographers in college to suddenly working with one of the best there's ever been, and it was quite special. We wound up doing 2 pieces together, in the late 90s. And he was a great influence on me too, really opened my eyes to a different kind of movement, because coming from the Martha Graham school, much different from the sort of Balanchine, point shoe, more balletic pieces that I was familiar with and, sort of wanting to work in. But yeah, Paul was a force.
Really. But now, when for you then, as a young you were then young when you said you just came out of college. How much did you have? So when you work, or say on average, when you work with a with a choreographer, is it usually the way? Which way around is it that the choreographer commissions you for a work, and you have then the freedom, or do you have to sort of go with what he or she says, what they want?
Yeah. So like I said before, it's always different. With Paul, he had gotten a CD of mine through a mutual friend, a dance writer actually named Mindy Aloff, great woman. And she was championing my music, and she was writing a piece on him, like a profile, and gave him a CD. And he spent months listening to the CD and then called me up and said, I want to do a dance to this part, this piece of your CD. And so it wasn't as much a commission as it was sort of a licensing agreement for the first piece. Then as we were working together, we found that we had ideas for a new piece, and we went back and forth on what that would be. And then when we sort of finally decided it's going to be X, the company commissioned me to write the score, which took about a year. It was for full orchestra. And then once he got the full score, he started making the piece. So in that case, it felt very much like sort of an old-fashioned Diaghlevian kind of collaboration where, we birthed this thing from the narrative and the genesis to the final product, which still gets performed. It's been revived a few times since the late 90s.
But it must be amazing, because you think it's two different things, two different disciplines. Do you say disciplines that you have, that the choreographer and the composer working together? Is there something that you learn from each other, or that you learn that you apply then in the music, or that makes you compose then differently? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, less so from Paul and more so from just spending so much time at the State Theater watching Balanchine and Robin's work and understanding why these pieces were still in the repertoire. Like what Balanchine made, I don't know, 300-400 pieces, but we see, the same 30 or 40 season after season, decade after decade. What makes those pieces work? It usually starts with a really good piece of music, but not always. And of course, the choreography is wonderful, but there's more to it than that. It's what the length is, what what the theme is. So spending so much time, watching these pieces, learning from them and what the takeaways were, I think influenced me more than sort of whatever Paul and I did together in the late 90s. So you have to learn. There's different ways to learn.
Mm. But I read somewhere that you had you were interested in musicals when you were younger. And also you had something, and I'm not sure completely if I understood it right, but with West Side Story, did you did you do editing on the music, or what exactly was the project there?
So Bernstein, toward the end of his life, was trying to record all his theater scores for Deutsche Grammophon and get the scores published for the first time by Boosey and Hawkes, his publisher. There had surprisingly never been a full score for West Side Story or for On the Town or for Candide or for Wonderful Town or for Mass. No, you could rent the parts and you get a piano, what's called a piano vocal score, which is what the conductor would work from, but there was no score. And Lenny was very interested in being taken seriously like opera composers were. And opera scores were always available. You could go and buy Tosca, or you could buy, Carmen, and study it, different versions of the score, the big score, the little pocket score. So he thought, of course, he struggled a lot in his life to get these pieces taken seriously, so that he wasn't just thought of as some Broadway pop composer. And so the deal that he struck was that Boosey and Hawkes would finally publish, the definitive editions that would incorporate various changes, fixes, corrections, edits that were compiled over years and that would be continued to be compiled when I came into the circle and was employed by Bernstein's estate after he died. So before he died, he only had the opportunity to record one of them, maybe two. Did he do Candide? I think he did Candide and West Side Story, but the scores weren't done. So my job was to take all the material that he used in the recording session when he recorded it in the mid or late 80s before he died, compare it to the original version, the movie version, notes that he had, notes that other folks, advisors to the estate had, and get that definitive score published finally. And it took a long time, as you can imagine. It's a big piece. And there were small errors and things that they hadn't even found, before I got there, big, like egregious things. And it was an amazing experience. I had just literally graduated college and moved into his house in the Dakota, in New York City, and it was like getting paid to do your PhD. And West Side Story was, first Symphonic Dances for West Side Story, which is a 25 minute instrumental, orchestral piece that was culled from the musical. That was my first job. And then my second job was West Side Story, the full show.
Well, when I read that, I'm such a big fan of West Side Story. I mean, I think this is such an incredible film with the dancing and the music, everything. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that must be one of those things where you think you had part of, because it's history, really.
It is. I think when people look at musical theater, 50, 100, 150 years from now, it will still be one that they talk about that was like no other, it was not the sound of music.
Exactly.
There's probably like 5 pieces of musical theater that will stand the test of time, and I think it's definitely one of them.
No, absolutely. But now you've recently done also a work with the New York City Ballet, and it's about a Balanchine. Is it a poem that Balanchine wrote the poem? Am I right?
Yes, you're right. It was more than just a poem, though. He set the poem to music for Stravinsky's 64th birthday. They were wonderful friends, having done so many pieces together, and also both sort of, Russian expats, first living in France and in exile, and then eventually settling in the United States, going back and forth between Los Angeles and New York. So Mr. Balanchine comes out from New York in the 40s and he is living in Beverly Hills, and Stravinsky is living in West Hollywood at the time, and they get together often for dinners, chit chat, pieces that they're working on together. And at one of these little celebrations for Stravinsky's 64th birthday, he presents this very short, funny song that he had written, a cappella, sang it, and gave the manuscript to Stravinsky. And Stravinsky liked it so much and was so touched that he said, "You should harmonize this, flesh it out for more voices." And Balanchine said, "I'm not the composer here." So Stravinsky took it upon himself. And that's not true. Balanchine actually was a composer. He had studied music in college at the same time that he was in the theater school in St. Petersburg studying dance, and was a wonderful musician. I mean, that's, I think, the biggest ingredient and key to understanding why his choreography is heads and tails better than anybody else's. He was a wonderful musician, really understood music, and could compose music. His father was a composer. And so Stravinsky harmonizes it for four voices and gives that manuscript back to Mr. Balanchine. And I got a copy of it in the 90s from the Harvard Library, where a lot of Stravinsky and Balanchine's personal effects and manuscripts lived.
Really?
And I started thinking, well, it was so lovely. And the idea that one master had given it to his friend, another master in another discipline, and that Stravinsky had harmonized it and given it back, it just seemed like it was begging to be something larger. So I started,
But so you just accidentally stumbled upon it, or is it known? Was it known that it was there?
It wasn't. It was barely known. There was one recording that existed that I hadn't yet heard when I found the manuscript, and it was like, it's 22 seconds long, so nobody was getting very excited about this thing except for me and maybe Robert Kraft, who was Stravinsky's personal assistant / conductor / academic advisor and biographer, everything. I mean, it would be like Petipa and Tchaikovsky co-writing a little piece of music. You would have to do something and to help get that out to the world. So I decided it should be the theme upon which I base variations. So it became a theme and variations. About 30 minutes long, and it was finally mounted almost a year ago. We're coming up. This May 5th will be the 1-year anniversary on the premiere.
Amazing.
But I had started writing the variations on Bernstein's piano in the Dakota when I was still working there, and I was already sort of picturing it in the pit coming out of the State Theater, which was 10 blocks south of the Dakota, and I could just imagine, what a glorious sound that would be. So back to your, how does it feel when you hear your music for the first time in rehearsal? That among all, from all my pieces, that one will always stand out as the most exciting moment, because it took 28 years to get it there. And to realize that and to persevere. And the choreographer that worked on it wasn't even born when I had started working on the piece.
Really? But
so that kind of journey, and I had almost given up many times along the way. Just it was such a pinch me moment.
But now I want to know about the 28 years. Why did it take so long? Was it, or is it just something that you didn't know how to make it work?
I wish I could say that was the answer, but at first the Balanchine Trust sadly was opposed to the idea. They didn't. The woman who was running the trust did not think anybody would be interested in Mr. Balanchine's music, didn't grant permission. So then it sort of died a bit, even though I had started sketching. And then somebody else came along and took over the Balanchine Trust. And she happened to love my work and was a big fan. So there was a different attitude at that point. And she granted me permission. It still took another 10 or 15 years to Peter Martins was running New York City Ballet from the time that Mr. Balanchine died in the 80s. And then the Me Too movement came along, and Peter Martins was suddenly gone from the company, which created an opportunity. Wendy Whalen stepped in as co-artistic director, and she heard the little snippets, the little sketches that I had written, and fell in love with this whole idea, and was already sort of thinking in her head, like, oh, we're going to be doing this 50th anniversary of the Stravinsky Festival that Balanchine created in the early 70s. This would be a perfect place to do this world premiere. So I think it was partly fate, partly timing, partly just perseverance and waiting for the moment. So
I love,
the moral is never give up if you really believe.
This really fascinates me. I love these stories of this type of thing, that there's something that has to happen, but it takes time to happen. That is, and this, like you say, the perseverance behind it and the patience and the belief, because it's a belief that it will work, that you had.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if J.K. Rowling had stopped after her first round of rejections. Exactly. Nobody wanted Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Nobody thought it would sell, or nobody wanted to touch it. But she persevered and waited until some academic publisher came along and took a chance on it. And you hear those stories all the time.
Always,
Alanis Morissette, right? The best-selling female artist album of all time, Jagged Little Pill. Everybody passed on it. Nobody wanted to put that record out. So if if you're passionate about what you're doing and you believe in it, just keep at it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. Now, I also believe in that, and that there is a timing for everything, and the right people get together for this to happen. But David, I want to know now, you as a child, where did this love for music start? Did you compose already as a young boy?
I did. I mean, I didn't write anything down, but my parents, they had a chest, like a toy chest of instruments, like a African zebra skin drum and a recorder and castanets and tambourine and my mom's old nylon string guitar. So I discovered this box, and I assume they did it on purpose because these tactile things were great for little kids, and just they loved music, not in any serious way, but they were big fans of music. And so I got into this box quite young and started making music. And then I discovered their record collection, and the one that really pulled me in. I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I learned how to put the albums. They taught me, how to put them on the spindle or whatever it was called, and put the needle on the record. Was Sgt. Pepper Lonely Heart Club Band.
Oh, okay. Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, the whole experience, from like the cardboard cutouts that came in the sleeve, and the wonderful packaging, and the fact that there was this real band trying to be another band, and there was all this humor in it, and orchestral music, right, with these big sounds and sitar, and it was so different from anything else in their record collection. And I would just listen to it constantly, and I probably played along with some of these toy instruments until I could actually compose something and write it down. which was, I was probably about 12 years old at that point, and was studying guitar and trumpet. So the first written down compositions, which weren't actually written down, they were just, chord progressions and lyrics, came in my early teens, I would say.
And your parents, they were not musicians?
No, they weren't. Okay. My grandfather, my mom's father, was an inventor. He invented hair clips,
really,
beauty salons, and so I always saw myself more like cut from that cloth, where I was inventing sound.
Yeah.
But no, my mom's brother was trained on the violin, but just sort of amateur, played in his school orchestra and that sort of. So no real formal education on the music side.
But did you then, at what age did you then discover that you can, or that want to do this as a career? Did you think about that as saying, okay, I want to be a composer?
Well, I definitely wanted to be a musician. Yeah, okay. I didn't think of myself as a songwriter or a composer until later in high school. But I knew that I wanted to make music for the rest of my life. There was nothing else that I was good at or cared about, and only applied to one college for one thing. And so
okay.
It's very
really
focused, much to my parents' dismay, because they wanted me, to have something to fall back on.
Oh yeah.
The usual thing that you hear from
security.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're going to go into music, it should be the business of music. A manager or a producer or something, where money was actually involved.
Yeah.
And less luck, I suppose. And as a parent now, I totally understand that, but it didn't feel good not to have their support growing up. That was hard.
Well, I thought also, I grew up like that also, that, you have to do something that brings security, or that, but my children, I was quite the opposite with them. I was.
Oh, good.
I was really thinking, I was watching them, what they were interested in, and I was listening to also the teachers, what the talents were, and I just decided, listen, go for it. If you've got the talent, if you've got the dream, then go for it. And there's so much time in life to do something else if it doesn't work out. So I'm the opposite. I'm the opposite in that. I've always felt if other parents were saying their children going to university and study a very, very serious degree, and my children were doing ballet, then I was thinking, am I doing the wrong thing? But no, I'm glad I did it that way. Yeah.
Good. There should be more parents like you. I hope to follow in your footsteps with my son. At least, I mean, he's only 15, but so college isn't yet a discussion. But it's also something that artists can use to motivate them and like push against, right? You have something to prove now, so you're gonna strive harder, work harder, to show everybody that they were wrong. So it can be useful, as painful as it is. There's a great quote. Bernstein's father was very opposed to him trying to make music his livelihood. Yeah, very discouraging. And when Bernstein becomes this famous overnight sensation at the age of 25, some reporters interviewed his father about it, and he said, well, how was I supposed to know my son was going to turn out to be Leonard Bernstein? Yeah. But Bernstein definitely, I think, felt like he had a lot to prove, because everybody wants their parents' support and love and respect.
Exactly, yeah. But now also, I recently spoke to a soprano who studied to be a dermatologist. So she actually specialized, but she said that it was she was still so drawn to wanting to sing that she chose that career then in the end to be a singer. And so I think you will always go to the thing that you are meant to do. So even if your parents guide you in a different direction, you will always go where you're supposed to go.
I think so. And, when I speak to young musicians or young artists in junior high school or high school, and this question often comes up, like, when did you know? How did you know? What was the path? My advice always is, look, the arts are so hard. As we started talking about at the very beginning of this chat, there's way more downs than there are ups.
Yeah.
And there's so many obstacles. And especially now, everybody's an artist. Everybody's a creator. Everybody's putting content out there. So it can't be something that you choose. It has to be something that chooses you. It really should feel like there's no other choice. This is what I have to do. Because if you don't have that attitude, it's going to be so hard to cut through the noise.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's very true. But do you teach as well?
I do. Very selective because I don't have a lot of time, but the one or two students that I do have bring so much joy to my life. And it's such a pleasure to be able to give back and be in a position, where I can help nurture young talent. So when I feel like it's a good match, I'll do it.
Do you think composing is something you can teach or you can learn, or is it something, can you already spot in a student when there is something?
That's a great question, because I used to always say you can't teach somebody how to create. And I kind of still believe that, but my thinking has changed a bit. So now my thinking is a person has to have natural talent. It has to already be there. But you can, as a teacher, help guide a young talent and help expose that person to other sounds, other ideology, other thinking about structure and form. And so much of composing music or writing a script or a novel is about architecture. That's what people don't always understand. They think, well, I can write a melody, so how hard could this be? But structure and architecture is so vital, especially now where attention spans are so short, and you really have to pull people in and keep their attention. So I think that's learnable. And that's something that I'm very good at. And so I do think you can teach. I think you can teach composition. I think you can teach writing. I don't think you can turn somebody who doesn't have the gift there already into a composer or an author, but I do think you can help guide them. And Bernstein, it's always going to go back to Lenny. He had this great series when he was at the New York Philharmonic called The Young People's Guide, or the Norton Lectures. So he was always teaching via TV. And I learned a lot from those, just watching them, even though he wasn't specifically teaching me. There's a lot to learn. And I think that if you're curious as a student and you're open, you can be guided. Yes. And then we as teachers, as the elders, are also learning as we're teaching. And again, going back to Lenny, he would say, well, in Hebrew, the word to teach is the same as the word to learn. It's the exact same word.
Really?
So when you are teaching, you're also learning. And so when I take on students, it's also from a selfish point of view, because there's certain something that I need to get from the student.
Really? Well, I've heard this so many times where musicians say that, and artists say that the moment they teach, then it's also that they learn, they get something back from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's very positive to think about that, because you're giving, but you're also receiving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, David, tell me, you've done so much, but what is the next for you? What are the wishes now?
The wishes are always the simple things, just to be healthy, and that my family continues to be healthy, and that the world doesn't end, fall apart. Every time you open the New York Times, it just seems like we're teetering on the end. But selfishly, from an artistic standpoint, I have a couple new pieces coming up. One that I'm hesitant to announce yet, but I'll put it on my socials when I'm ready. But I'm very excited, and we're already working on it. I'm working on it with the choreographer, whose name is Melissa Toogood. She's fantastic. Comes from the Merce Cunningham School in the Pam Tanowitz. And I'm working on a piece with Stephen Melendez, who's was just named artistic director of New York Theater Ballet, and that's going to premiere in the fall in New York. And it's the first time. Yeah, if you're in town, cop you some tickets.
Oh, I would love. I've never been to America. I should go.
Oh, come on! Are you serious?
I'm serious. Yeah.
Well, you have to come to New York at some point.
I'll have to. No, definitely. That would be a good time to come.
It's a good excuse to come.
Yeah.
And it's exciting for me because I'm playing almost all the music on my guitar live on stage with dancers, which I've never done before. So that's another thing, like to always be trying new things and challenging myself. Of course, I've conducted, and I've played in orchestras, and I've played in lots of bands and jazz bands and all kinds of venues. But to actually play with dancers on the stage as a soloist is going to be a whole new.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing. Was this how you saw it? Was this your idea to do it like that?
Not at first. When Stephen and I first began talking about this piece, it was going to be a small ensemble. And then over the course of months of discussion and going back and forth about it and meeting up in New York, and I don't even remember exactly how, it was just like, oh, wait a second, this would be different. This would be novel. And so I started creating little sketches on my guitar and doing a lot of loop where I'm playing different textures over top of myself. So it doesn't just sound like a solo guitar. And he got very excited about it. And then I got more excited about it. And that's where we landed. So that's going to be fun. And then I'm writing a memoir at the same time that both talks about different experiences I've had in my life that are pretty crazy, and also looks at a specific piece of music in each chapter. So that's different for me. I've only ever really written fiction.
Really?
To actually be pulling from my real life, and it's not chronological or anything. It just sort of comes in and out in sort of random fashion. And the music that I'm talking about is both, from a sociological and theoretical point of view. It's but accessible. It doesn't feel like an academic pursuit. So I'm excited about that too.
But I think it's so important that you do that because it's from your it's from your mind then that the reader can get that information. I think that's so important that you do that.
Thanks. Yeah. You'll be the one who reads it.
Definitely. No, I would love to. Yeah, no, definitely. I actually spoke to a ballet teacher. Well, she used to be my daughter's ballet teacher at the Royal Ballet, and she was saying the same thing. She's writing about experiences, and she's writing about, you know, the time she spent with Margot Fonteyn and all the things that happen. And I get so excited about that because I think it's so needed that artists do that. You know, that we hear these stories behind the scenes. That's very important. And from the artist herself, or from you, you know, from you yourself, that's been written. I think it's very important.
I agree. I mean, I think 80% of these are autobiographies or memoirs. So I'm with you.
You'll let me know, David, when you're done with that one.
I sure will.
I want to read it. Yeah. David, it was so lovely to talk to you. I follow you on Instagram, and your dog is so cute.
Oh, thank you. Just arrived.
It's so
We'll be
sweet.
seeing a lot more. She's gotten more love on my socials than my music does. So
really,
you know, the internet's in love with cute animals, right? Exactly.
Yeah. But it was wonderful talking to you. It's really, you've got fascinating stories to tell, and your work also. And I've got you on Spotify now, listening to your music. Amazing work that you're doing, and I really hope that I could one day
come
see
to New
one
York.
of your
Yes.
Come to New York and see one of the performances.
You must, or we need to come to Vienna.
I think that's also a good idea. Yeah,
I haven't been since the 90s, but I would love to come back to Vienna.
Yeah.
I love it over there.
And please don't let us wait another 28 years for your next
Not my intention.
your next wonderful project. Yeah.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Great pleasure, great privilege. Bye-bye, David.